Hi there, Douglas here from Craft Hardware with another Brew Day video for you today. This one I'm going to do in English. Apologies to our German viewers. I'll try to speak slow enough so you can follow along, but I wanted to make sure our foreign audience also has a chance to get something out of the video. Today I'm going to be brewing on the 2-vessel HERMS, the HERMS Duo. You can read all about it in the shop. What you see in the shop may look just a little bit different. I've got the output valves of the system set up to give a little bit more space between the kettles. That's just how I prefer it. I've got lots of space in the brew cellar. What you might see in the shop has the outputs of the kettles coming directly out of the front, and then with the 90 over parallel to each other, in line with each other I should say. Both ways work just fine. This is how I prefer to do it. I'm going to be brewing with the EINBREW 1V1P system controller. A very fine product out of the UK, CE certified, plug and play, and it has a lot of nice features and everything we need to operate the system. So before we get started, just a quick look at the recipe here. I've got a double IPA. We've got about 10 kilos of malt in the malt bill. I've got 32 liters to mash with in the mash tun, and 25 liters in the hot liquor tank, which is a bit more than I need, but I wanted to cover the coil completely. More about that later. Right, other than that, it's a pretty standard hopping schedule, heavy in the whirlpool, and yeah, we're hopefully gonna have 35 liters in the fermenter. Leave a couple in the kettle, so we're gonna end up with about 37. Okay, let's take a quick look at the inside of the kettles and I'll explain how the system works. Okay, so this is a 2-kettle HERMS system. It's designed to have a small footprint to minimize equipment costs while still getting the advantages of a HERMS recirculating brewing system. HERMS, very quickly, for those that don't know, is a heat exchanger mash recirculation system, HERMS for short. And it's got, in this case, a mash tun on the left. Let's go ahead and open that up. We've notched the lid here to allow for the sparging return water. Inside the mash tun, we've got a false bottom on the 2-centimeter stand. That's the low stand with a dip tube, which you probably can't see, that penetrates the false bottom to get underneath it and collect all of the clear wort, which will then come out of the kettle through the dip tube and be recirculated through the hot liquor tank on this side. Excuse me. The hot liquor tank is also our boil kettle. That's why I've got the steam condenser installed. I installed it in the lid because I'm boiling about 42 liters today. That's pretty much over the border. I recommend to keep it under 40 if you want to use the sidewall port. No difference in performance as far as the steam condenser is concerned, just a preference. I like to have it here because you have the lid fully accessible to you without any fittings on it. In this case, I've got the lid adapter and the kettle hanger, so the kettle clamp keeps the unit installed and makes it a little bit easier to open and close. So inside the kettle we can see the HERMS coil, the output at the bottom, the input at the bottom, the output at the top here. We've got a dip tube and an output valve here, a heating element, and that's all. Temperature is going to be measured at the output of the HERMS coil. I'll show that a little bit in just a minute here, a little bit more closely. You may notice there's a few extra ports on these kettles here on the sides, one on the side over here. That's not standard. These are the kettles I use for testing new ideas and just trying out new things. So there's a few extra ports on there that you might not get in the standard system. So what we're looking at here is the mash tun on the left, boil kettle, hot liquor tank on the right. Each has a ball valve connected to a dip tube. We generally will open and close them independently of each other. We don't really need to circulate both at the same time. They come out into a small T-fitting with an elbow 90 down to the pump. The pump sits vertically. In case anyone is wondering about purging and air entrapment within the pump head, the output of the pump head is actually in line here with the impeller chamber, so there's really not much of a chance for air to get trapped in this position. Go ahead and use it like this. I haven't had any trouble with cavitation or purging. Out of the pump we have another standard quick clean ball valve. We use that to regulate pump flow from very low flow to high flow. During mashing we'll have obviously the highest flow possible desired, so we open it up all the way and let it circulate. Later during the sparge and lauter process we're going to clamp that down pretty good so that we only get about a liter per minute when we're doing those stages of the brewing. Pretty straightforward temperature readout here, temperature setup. This is obviously optional, but I like to have something in place just to have a quick check against the control unit to make sure that we're not too far off. Let's move over here to the HERMS coil. The input of the HERMS coil at the bottom, output at the top. And that does help us because we're not recirculating within the hot liquor tank. Again, we wanted to keep the system as simple as possible, so we have one pump that will be used to move the wort through the heat exchanger. There will be no recirculation here, and yes, you will see a bit of heat stratification from bottom to top, getting warmer as we go. And we're going to use that to our advantage by having the output of the HERMS coil at the top of the HLT. And I actually have found that to be a bit even more efficient than mixing. When you're mixing, you have to heat the entire volume of water within the hot liquor tank, and when we're using the stratification effect, it's warmer at the top, and that's where our output is. You get some basically more quick heating capabilities when you're just essentially heating the top layer of water. Of course, over time, the stratification convection will mix everything up, and you won't have that stratification necessarily towards the end. Temperature control is done here at a T fitting right on the bolted onto the outside of the brew kettle. This is connected to our controller. This is going out to the sparge arm. In a HERMS system like this, you typically want to have the temperature control point as close to the mash return as possible. It's more difficult to control this system if you put the sensor directly in the mash kettle, or let's say obviously not at the beginning of the input of the coil. You may lose a few tenths of a degree moving through the coil back to moving through the hose back into the mash tun. But I found that this works equally as well if you put it here or if you put it at the top of the sparge arm. I prefer it here because it's a bit tighter fit and it's more stable. Allows us to move the sparge arm a little bit easier. Right, so that's pretty much it for the setup. Let's have a quick look at the EINBREW controller, and then we'll get started with the brew day. Here we're looking at the EINBREW 1V1P controller out of the UK, a CE certified plug-and-play controller, very simple to use, very effective. It has a lot of nice features that I really like. It uses industry standard, these are I believe C19 and C14 connectors. On the pump I've actually got it connected through an adapter, just a Schuko adapter. The heating element I wired directly onto the cable, and this is the power in. We've got one temperature sensor coming in as well. So we can control one pump, one heating element, and we have one control point. And that's exactly what we need for our HERMS Duo. So again, minimizing the system cost by allowing us to use the smaller of the controllers from EINBREW. The system has 4 main stages of the brewing process. Preheating, that's when we're heating up the mash water, actually mashing, boiling of course, and cooling. And there's some settings that you can change in each one of those stages. Once we're on here, preheat, I'm just going to show you my preheat temperature is set to 68. Currently we're at 26, so I did turn the system on briefly a few minutes ago. This shows us the time remaining, and this shows us the vessel temp. Again, set point at the bottom, actual temperature on top in red. There's really nothing I'm going to change here. If I wanted to have a lower mash in temperature, I could just change that here. I'm going to select the mash stage, and go ahead and set up the timings of our mash steps. I'm actually going to do a very simple infusion mash at 65 degrees. This is stage 1. It's set for 1 hour. 1 hour at 65 degrees. The temperature will begin once we've hit the 65 degrees. If we mash in at 68, we'll lose a few, but it should end up right about 65. The timer will start counting down, and when it's finished, we get the alarm and we come and cancel the alarm, and it will move to the next stage. Stage 2 is actually set for 1 minute. That's a bit confusing. This is set for 1 minute. This is my mash out stage. I set it to 75. I don't really need that for any length of time. I'm just going to have it go until we're ready to move the sparge water out of the hot liquor tank into the mash tun. So that's set for 1 minute, and you can set up to 9 different mash stages, mash temperature stages, if you need them. Okay, moving to the boil settings. On top we've got the overall boil timer. This is going to be a 90-minute boil. We have a lot of Pilsner malt in the recipe, and we're going to cook it for 90 minutes. On the bottom, you can set your control power. This is the initial power. Once boil temperature is reached, it will be reduced to 60% of the full power, which is about right for the steam condenser, and we may need to adjust that as we go. So we can set that here, and then we can set our hop additions. Again, up to 9 hop additions, and all this does is give us an alarm, a reminder, hey, it's time to add your first hops, it's time for the second or third, and up to 9. I've set one for 30 minutes, so that's going to give us 60 minutes bittering hops. And then more towards the end, I've got a 15-minute hop addition, and then a 10-minute reminder just to get me, remind me to set up everything for cooling and winding down the boiling. And then I'm not using the remainder of the hops timers. Finally, on the cooling stage, this is a nice to have thing. It basically gives us an alarm when we hit our set point. So my set point today for the cooling temperature is 34, quite high of course. I am using a Kvike yeast, and I'm going to stop the system at 34, turn off the cooling coil, and hopefully pitch at about 32 and let that come down and ferment at around 30 degrees Celsius. So once we're ready to go, we can simply select the preheat stage. We would push and hold the pump button briefly to turn the pump on, and then start the operation here with the start button. If I need to pause the current stage for any reason, I can push pause, and if we need to stop it for any reason, you push and hold the stop button for just about a half second to a second. One of the nice things that we're going to see when we turn the pump on for the first time, the EINBREW allows us to have kind of a purge cycle setting. So the pump will turn on for 5 seconds, turn off for 2 seconds, and it'll do that a number of times. And those settings are all configurable. I've set them for just one simple on-off cycle. Again, that helps us purge the pump. I haven't found that to be necessary, but why not? It sure can't hurt. So when the pump turns on, you'll hear it turn on for a few seconds, it'll turn off briefly, and then it'll start running continuously. So that's it for the controller. Let's go back and have another overview of the brew system. Okay, so I've got the brewing water already measured out. It's reverse osmosis filtered water, 32 liters in the mash tun, 25 liters in the hot liquor tank, which is actually more than I'm going to need to sparge. But I wanted to make sure that the coil is completely covered for heat exchange efficiency. Whatever I don't use, we can set it aside for cleaning or pour it out. I'm at the limit of the system here in terms of filling up the mash kettle when we're ready to do the sparge and lauter. The idea of this system is pretty unique, and what we're going to do is move all of the hot water out of the hot liquor tank. We're going to layer it on top of the heavier sugar-laden wort in the mash tun and fill it up to the amount that we need to do our lautering back to the boil kettle, which is then drained of all water before we do that. So I'm at the limit because I've got a pretty big beer and I want it to make 35 liters of it. So what I'm going to do is take the first maybe 5 liters before we move all the water over and drain it out into a separate container and reserve that for when we're ready to cook. So we're all ready to go. Let's go ahead and turn the system on and get the sparge water heating up. While we're waiting for the sparge water to heat, I will be milling the grains and getting ready for the brew day. I'm going to set this on preheat. I'm going to start the pump. Oops, gotta make sure your ball valve's open there. So I'm full open on the output, full open obviously on the input. Never restrict the input side of your system. Don't know if you heard that, but it did cycle once. The pump turned off, turned back on again. It's running just fine. I've got the sparge arm set just below the water level so that we don't introduce unnecessarily any oxygen. We're ready to go. I'm going to hit start on the preheat. And the timer is counting up. It's going to count up until the vessel temperature reaches our set point. And then it'll give us an alarm and let us know that we're ready for mashing in, and we can begin the mashing phase. So we'll be back to check on that when we are ready to mash in. Okay, we have reached our set point temperature of 68 in the mash tun, so we're ready to mash in. What we want to do here is actually stop the unit. We don't want the heating element to be controlled while we're not pumping. I'm going to turn off the pump, close the output valve, or we will close it later, for the mashing in. The heater will keep running. If the water's not circulating, we won't get an accurate reading out of the probe here. So it's best just to turn the system off, I find. I mean, push the stop button, that is to say. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. That automatically turns the pump off for us. It's good practice to get into the habit of turning off the heating element whenever you turn off the pump, so that you won't have any chance of the system running out of control and basically running unregulated without being able to measure that temperature accurately. Water has to be circulating, wort has to be circulating to get a good reading. So I turned the system off and we are ready to mash in. What I like to do is to move the sparge arm out of the way completely so that I can get a good stirring going. So I'm just going to unclip that here. Use caution because that's a little bit warm, of course. And I'll just set that right inside the brew kettle for a few minutes. So again. Okay, so now we've got access to the kettle. So. Okay. Go ahead and get the sparge arm set up again. Looks like we're at about the 44 liter level there, in case anybody's wondering, once we added the grains. That's pretty full, and you can see why I'm going to want to drain off the first, let's say, 5 liters of wort here when we're ready to sparge, because we don't have the capacity quite for this bigger beer in this volume that I want to brew it today. So the sparge arm is just under the wort level, maybe a couple centimeters below the surface, and that's again to prevent any unnecessary oxidation, unnecessary oxygen being driven into the system. And go ahead and close everything up again. When we start pumping, I'll take that off just to have a look, see that everything is working properly. And now we just wait a few minutes and I'll be back when we're ready to start pumping again. Okay, so a few minutes have passed, probably 4 minutes. I didn't count actually, but that seems good, and I'm going to go ahead and start the pumping now. We're going to move to the mash schedule here on the EINBREW. The first thing I'm going to do is just go ahead and select that. We'll move it up to mash. I'm going to go ahead and turn the pump on. I've got the valve almost all the way closed. I'll just open that a little bit. We want to start slow. So we'll get the pump running. And now I'm going to turn the system on. Probably move to an overhead shot here in just a moment, but just to show you how how this is going to look. I'm not sure if you guys can see that. That's, I don't know, maybe 1/3 of the way open. I'm eventually going to open that all the way. Our set point is 65 Celsius. Open that a little bit. And I'll move to the overhead shot now so that we can have a look inside the mash tun and see how it looks as we go. Okay, here we are looking overhead. Just a quick shot at the EINBREW unit. Let's see if I can get in on that. Our temperature is 65.1, so again, once you know your system a little bit, you can dial that in and get your temperature at about the right set point after mashing in, accounting for the cooler temperature of the grains. Okay, let's have a look inside the mash tun. See how things are looking. Make sure that they're moving along nicely. This is still pretty cloudy, pretty foamy on top. That's going to clear up, of course, as we go. And I'm going to move up, open the valve to completely open. There we go. And the spreader plate is going to be just below the surface here. Okay, we're 40 minutes in to the mash schedule. Just have a quick look at the wort here. And that is pretty much crystal clear, the top layer here, what I'm seeing. Looking really good. Recirculating nicely. Temperature is steady at 65. Everything is looking good so far. 20 minutes and then the temperature will be raised by the system automatically to our mash out temperature 75. Have a look at that. That's just beautiful. Okay, the EINBREW let us know with the tone that the first stage is done, and it rolls directly into step 2, which I've set to 75 degrees for 1 minute. What that means is it'll raise the temperature until we hit 75, and then it will hold that temperature for 1 minute and then stop. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm not going to let that quite hit 75. I'm going to hit pause. So I pause the system. System says pause. Now the vessel will not be controlled. The temperature is basically everything is on hold. The pump is still running. So we're getting ready to sparge. I'm going to move the camera. We can have a closer look. I'm going to take some of the wort out and put it into this bucket. I've got a polypropylene bucket, a pretty standard item. Temperature resistant up to, I believe, about 80, 82 degrees. So I'm pushing it, putting the wort in at 75. But I'm okay with that. I'm just going to have it in here for a few minutes and then we'll put it into the empty brew kettle. The reason we're doing that is because I want to have more output of a stronger beer here. So I need about 20 liters to sparge, clear water, moving that over, and I'm at 40 right now. That's just not quite enough. I'm going to go ahead and, just to make it comfortable, take about, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 liters out of here into the bucket, and then we can begin the sparging process. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and pull this out. That's pretty hot, so I'll just grab it with a towel. Oh, sorry. Never undo the wrong clamp. Right. So all I'm going to do is move this over. See, that's not going to reach. We'll put it down here on the table. We can close the valve pretty much almost all the way so I don't spill a lot. And open it back up. And I'm just going to pump right into the bucket here. Watching the level markings in the kettle. I'll probably take it down to 32. Alright, we are at about 32. That leaves us plenty of space in the brew kettle, in the mash tun. And I will hang this back in. Open up the valve again. Okay, so we're not going to run at full power on the valve here. We're not going to open it up all the way when we're moving the water over from the hot liquor tank. Let me move this out of the way. Once this brew kettle is empty, we will move this wort over. I'm not sure, there's really, can't see much there. It's pretty concentrated, but it looks very clear, which is exactly what we like. So, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to go ahead and stop the pump, or I will just close it most of the way. And I'm going to open up the brew kettle, simultaneously closing the mash kettle. And what we're doing now is moving water over into the mash tun. We want to do this pretty slowly, not to mix it up too much. So I'm going to fill that up. We left it at 32. I need 20 liters, so I'm going to take it up to 52 liters, and I'll probably go ahead and add an extra 3 or 4 liters in there just for a little bit of a buffer in case we need more. I don't think we will. But it doesn't harm us because at the end we can just dump out whatever is left in the mash tun. What I like to do as I'm filling this up is raise the arm so that we're not too deep in the wort, because we want to really keep that up as high as possible in the level of the clear water that we're moving over. Now here's a look inside the mash tun. Doesn't really look like much is happening, but we can see, well, I'm not sure if you can see that, but it's obviously very clear water here on top. We definitely want to use that stratification so that we're washing out the grain bed of all the sugars. And I'm just going to show you, flow rate's pretty low. We don't want too much turbulence in there mixing everything up. Okay, so I filled up to 55 liters. I did speed it up quite a bit at the end. I did get impatient, of course. You can see that some of the bed mixed up a little bit, but it is still very, very clear at the top. Not sure if I can scrape some of that away. Well, anyways, you can see that that's very clear, maybe a little bit of wort and mostly water. We still have a couple liters left in the brew kettle. We're going to take that out right now. Just a quick look down at the setup here. I put a bucket underneath to catch what we're going to pump out right now. What I'm going to do is we have to make a hose change here. At the moment, we've just circulated the hot liquor tank through the coil, so the coil's now been cleaned, more or less. All the sugars have been washed out, and that's good. We want to keep it like that. I don't really want to have the sugars in there caking onto the sides of the tubing while we're boiling away. So it's been flushed with water. That's basically clean. What I'm going to do is make sure that the output of the tube here is in atmosphere, so it's not under the wort level, because we don't want to siphon out our beautiful mash tun here. So we're actually done with the sparge plate. I'm going to go ahead and put that off, take that off. I'm going to drain the system. So I'm going to put that in a bucket, have a couple rags nearby. And the first thing I'm going to do is try and get as much water out of the kettle as we can. So I'll turn the pump back on. I'm not going to run it too fast. And as the water level gets down to get the maximum amount out, I'm going to tip it just a little bit. As you can see, there's some flex in the system. I'm going to go ahead and just tilt it towards the dip tube so that we can get out as much as possible. And after we run this dry, we're going to want to turn the pump off pretty quick and close the output valve so we don't have anything washing back in. And there we go. We close that and turn off the pump. Okay, so we still have water in the coil. The kettle's close and none of that can wash back in through siphon. What we want to do is break the circuit here. And I'm going to open it up right here and let the hot water drain out of the coil, as well as anything that might be in the line here. So I can do that with getting out of the way. I'm just going to raise this up above the level of the output. Let's see how I can do that. Just move it out of the way. Okay, this is pretty hot, so you might want to wear thermal gloves here. I've done this quite a few times, so all I'm going to do is just open this up and get water all over myself. Everything's fine. And we can see the air moving out and the water moving out this way. A little bit of a siphon effect here. Very nice. So all I'm going to do is just take off this end cap here and move the temperature sensor into the boil kettle. And the main reason we're doing that, well, a couple of reasons we're doing that, but the main reason is to have boil detection, to watch your boil temperature, make sure you're around when it starts to boil. And then during the cooling phase, it's good to know what the work temperature is at, so when to stop cooling. Okay, so we've got that temperature sensor now set up in the boil kettle. The output of the HERMS coil is just going to be open during the boil. Towards the end of the boil, I'll get set up here with my cooling hose adapters. But for now, got some clean water in there. Just dump everything in that we don't need. We are going to attach the sparge arm here, and what we're going to do is I'm just going to rest that in the bottom of the boil kettle and then connect it to the output of the pump. Always check and make sure that the handle of your tri-clamp isn't interfering with the operation of the valve. Just keep it on the other side as much away from there as you can. One other thing I'm going to do is put just a filter bag on the end of the sparge arm so that we can actually have a look at the end of how much grain would have made it over into the boil kettle. Okay, so at this point we do really want to make sure to louter over pretty slowly. Both kettles are closed. I'm going to go ahead and open the mash tun. Let's just make sure we've got everything connected and tight. Looking good. This is all open and fine. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and open this up. And I'll open up the pump just a little bit. Again, we want to go slow. And I like to use about 1 liter per minute as a good target rate for lautering. I'm not going to be impatient with that. I want to make sure that we get the maximum washing of the bed. So I will go ahead and take some time with that. So the system is still in the stop position. I'm not going to change it over to boil yet. I'm just going to go ahead and turn the pump on manually. Just to get it started, I might open it up a little bit more. Get that air out as quickly as possible. Okay. I'm going to close that. Just to show you real quick. It's not a trickle, it's a bit more than a trickle. But I'm going to let that go. I try to get it at about 1 liter a minute. I almost forgot that we've got about 10 liters of wort, 8 liters of wort to add back into the system as well. So I put a silicone hose on the end of this bucket, and I'm going to go ahead and just put that right down there in the bottom. And I can rest this in between the kettles and make sure we get that, of course, back into the system. And again, the only reason I did this is because I'm brewing higher volume of a stronger beer, which went over the normal system capacity. Don't usually have to do this. I usually tend to brew 20-liter batches of pretty standard 6% beer, so system is well equipped to handle those volumes without having to lauter off in between. Right, so the heating element is now covered completely by wort. I've gone ahead and removed the hose here, just put a towel there in case we get a few drips of water coming out of the coil. The nylon bag is out of the way. And again, you don't really need this. I'm only using this for demonstration purposes. We'll have a look at what's inside there when it's all done. We can go ahead and move to the boil phase. I just hit select, I move it up to boil, and then I'm going to hit start. The boil timer is 1.5 hours, but of course it won't start that timer until we reach the boiling point. And that's why we want to have, well, it's one of the reasons why we want to have that temperature sensor in there. It does have a boil detection function. I found that it can be off by a half minute or minute in detecting the boil. When you're using a steam condenser, stay close by to make sure that it's not going to boil over if it's not detected. Once it is detected, it'll ramp down to your preset power level. Mine was 60%, and it will start the boil timer and of course subsequently the hops timers. Okay, just about near the end here. The boil volume should be 40.2 with a temperature correction. I checked it out online. We need about 41, just a little over 41. And what I'm going to do when we're close, get ready here, I'm going to close the mash tun and open the boil kettle. What I would like to do is just recirculate for a minute or two here. The main reason I'm doing that is just so that I'm going to drain this and pour it into a cup and use that as a sample for my hydrometer. Of course there's other ways of doing that, but that's just part of my process. So let me see if I can take the grain bag off without hurting myself. Just a quick word about recirculating hot wort. Definitely do not want to recirculate boiling wort. The pump can handle the temperature capacity, but when you're at boiling temperature, it will cause cavitation in the pump. So please do not try it. It will damage the pump. Maybe not immediately, but if you leave it like that too long. So we don't want to do that. And in fact, the EINBREW has a temperature setting for the pump that will disable the pump above your set point. So if you set it at 95 and the temperature is 96, the pump will not turn on. That's a safeguard built into the EINBREW. Again, a pretty nice feature to have. And find my collection container. Where did that go? Ah. Oh, first let's take a look in the bag. See if I can scan down here. Here's the grain bag that I took off. Really not much in there from the looks of it. No, really nothing at all. A few minor bits of grain, no husks to be seen here. Just a few tiny little bits of really very clear wort that's coming over. That's about the extent of it. Yeah, I'm not concerned at all about that. Looks pretty good. Means we've done a good job with the lauter. Moving clear wort over the brew kettle without any grain husks. So let's see what we can do here. Just going to collect a few hundred milliliters. Okay, the valve is still open. Let's make sure that's all closed off. I'm going to close everything now. What I'm going to do at this point, while we're waiting for the boil, I can disconnect the system and reconfigure this a bit. I'm going to remove the mash tun from the system. I can take the clamp off. We're going to be using that later for whirlpooling with the whirlpool arm. Get this all cleaned out and have everything set up for whirlpooling later. What I usually do for the whirlpooling is disconnect here at the T input. I've got an end cap that I took off. I could put that end cap on. I could put a thermometer in there or a thermocouple if I have an extra place for it. I'm just going to cap it off and have this section of the circuit still in place. We lose a little bit of the support that's provided by this kettle. So this is, I don't know, about 2 centimeters above the tabletop, and I've got a rubber pad that I put underneath to support it. You will want to support this with something just to prevent excess weight from bearing on there. So I usually just put a towel underneath the fitting. There will be some residual liquid in there, and I'll have my end cap ready in place. And all I'm going to do is open this up here. Making sure that everything is closed, please. And move that away. A couple drops, not much. I'm not overly concerned about sanitation on this line right here, because what I'm going to do is recirculate very hot water through it. Not boiling, of course, but maybe starting at 90 degrees when we begin the cooling process, 93, 94. I'm going to let that recirculate through, and it will sanitize this entire liquid path here. The first hops charge, 75 grams of Columbus. And I'm going to put in the hop spider, which has got a special hook on there that allows me to clip it over the lid, and it will rest down in the wort without falling in, but still allow the lid to close well enough that the steam condenser will function properly. Those are available in the shop if you do have one of the hop spiders. It's got the kind of crossbars across the top, the ones that are cylindrical, not conical. Hop alarm, just silence that by pushing stop. I'm going to open this carefully now and put in the basket. We've got the heating element, the HERMS coil in there, but it doesn't interfere with it. I'll go ahead and pour in the hops. Okay, first hops charge is down. This is the 10-minute alarm. I'm going to put in some yeast nutrient because we're brewing with, fermenting with quag yeast. That tends to need a little bit extra push to make it through the fermentation. So I'm just going to pop in those capsules. And I reconfigured the pump a little bit. Just noticed that the hose that I had wasn't quite long enough to reach the whirlpool. So what I did was I removed the T completely, just turned the kettle a little bit so I could rest the pump on the table, connected the pump directly to the output. Now, output of the kettle. Now the output of the pump is pointing upwards, and I can easily make that height adjustment on the whirlpool tube. So I just did a real quick reconfiguration. One of the great things about Tri-Clamp is nothing is fixed anymore. You can make changes as you go and move things around really rapidly. So the only other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to connect a couple fittings, threaded adapters here on the outside, and get the hose ready for the cooling water. And that's about it. So we're coming up on the end of the boil, 8 minutes left, and then we'll begin whirlpool recirculation and the last hop charge. Okay, we've got the end of boil alarm. I'm going to go ahead and push stop on that. Now the system's already off, the red light is on off. I'm just going to hit stop again just to make sure. So we are good. The heating element is now turned off completely. I'm going to give the whirlpool hop charge in. So there we go, into the hop spider. And I'm going to get the whirlpool tube set up. Probably going to go ahead and turn off the steam condenser. I don't like to let my whirlpool charge sit too long at 100 degrees. This is a double IPA, so it can be pretty bitter without any issues. If I'm doing a nice DIPA, I like to cool down right away. Once this is off, if I've turned this off, I really want to have that lid open to let the steam escape, so that we don't get any DMS trapped in the system. I'm going to use this for my cooling line, so I'll go ahead and hook that up carefully. Let me see if I can arrange the camera here. Okay, that's a little bit better. So lid is open, got the hops in the bag. Let's see what else. I'm going to get the whirlpool tube set up. I've got to connect it to the output of the hose. The kettle clamp is already installed on it. And I'm just going to set that down fairly low in the kettle and get a whirlpool started here briefly. Make sure it's pointing in the direction that I want. And I don't know, it's probably 1/3 of the way up in the wort. One of the things I like to do with the hop spider, since I want to make myself feel better about the utilization, is I like to give it a stir every once in a while, especially with this amount of hops. What I'm actually going to do now is unhook it from the kettle and let it rest down within that HERMS coil. But I just started the pump. I just hit start on the control panel. I had the valve open. I've got both valves open now. I'm going to go ahead and open it all the way so we get a nice whirlpool going inside the kettle. And looking at the wort temperature, I'm going to turn on my cooling water here and try to get us down to about 80. Every time I do this, I think I ought to replace this tubing with something more stable for the temperatures that come out of here. And not forget about it until next time. So I like to just let that run for a couple minutes. Less than a minute, and check where it lands and then turn it back on if it's not cool enough. It's easy to overshoot because it cools pretty quickly at the high end of the range. I'm going to go ahead and take the lid off since this is just pretty much in our way at this point. '86 Celsius. I'm going to go ahead and run a little bit more water through there. Try and lock in the bitterness. Get us to about 80 and then let the whirlpool run for a good 20 or 30 minutes. The whirlpool has been running now for over a half hour, about 35 minutes. Now let's have a quick look in the kettle just to see what we have. Looking pretty good. Temperature is at 67 Celsius. I'm going to go ahead and turn on the cooling water now and bring us down to about 34 is what I'd like to have. Okay, so we are actually at 38 degrees. It's been 12 minutes. And since we're down below possible levels of cold side, hot side oxidation, hot side aeration problems, I like to raise the sparge arm above the level of the wort. You can hear it now circulating. It gets pretty bubbly, and what I'm doing there is just oxygenating the wort. This is another advantage of using the sparge arm, being able to raise and lower this. Makes it easy to oxygenate the wort. I don't use an carbonation stone or anything else. Just let it run like this for 5 minutes or a bit longer if I'd like, and we're good to go. Fill the fermenter. Okay, whirlpool is finished. The wort looks like it's settled. It's not moving anymore. I'm ready to fill the fermenters. So we're going to use the pump for that. The valves are full open. I'm going to just close this output here just down to a trickle at the beginning so it doesn't come out too fast. I'm just going to undo the whirlpool arm, and we'll use this to reach into the fermenters. I'm also going to take a sample for gravity reading. So I'll just stick this into the fermenter and reach over and turn the pump on here. I've got the scale teared out so I can measure out 17 liters and then fill up the second fermenter. Let's see if I can grab a sample here at the same time. Good. Okay, here we go. It's coming out pretty good there. Here's just a quick look at my fermentation setup. I like to try and do everything in a closed system once primary fermentation is done, so we don't have to introduce any oxygen. I'm doing a single dry hop charge. We've got the two fermenters here. I put a jacket around them, some insulation that I glued together, and put that around the keg to maintain the warm temperatures. I like to keep it around 30. Supposedly that will help develop the ester profile from the quake yeast. So it's just a completely different mentality. But such as it is, I've got the Thermowell temperature probes here. Those are inserted down. I usually put them down to the bottom and then pull it up just 10 centimeters or so. That's connected to a Craft Beer Pi setup, so I can record temperatures and watch them as the fermentation advances. And then coming out of the gas tube is just a connection over to the next set of kegs. In that second set of kegs over here, I've already loaded the dry hop charge inside. I've got a couple things that I'm testing to filter out dry hops out of this keg. Each keg has got about 100 grams in there, a decent amount for what's probably going to be 15 liters. And I'm going to put that into secondary here after fermentation is complete. Let the dry hops sit for a period of time and then rack it off to the serving kegs, again with a floating dip tube. So anyways, we've got, out of the gas side, we've got fermenter gas coming out. It's going into the long dip tube, the outpost here of the keg. And the idea is that this is going to flush our keg with CO2 during fermentation. The gas will come out of the gas side and into the blow-off container here. I've used this method quite a few times. I'm pretty happy with it. I feel like I've got a good system set up for racking and maintaining clean beer without any oxygenation issues. So that works pretty well for me, and potentially you're going to have a product or two available for the filtration side of the dry hopping. So that's pretty much it for my fermentation setup. So the sample reads 1072, which is actually what I expected to get, including the dextrose, the 500-600 grams dextrose I was going to put in. That dextrose would have added another 1.5 Plato. So right now we're at 17.5, which is what I wanted to have, and I ended up not adding the sugar because it looks like we had a better mash conversion than I expected. I'll have to adjust my recipe builder for the next batch and bring up the efficiency just a little bit. So I always have a couple rags handy. There's probably some residual liquid in here. In fact, I'm going to open this up just to see if anything drains back in. Yeah. Good. And I'll just go ahead and take this apart here, top to bottom. And put everything into the sink. The pump will not go in the sink. We don't want to submerge that in water completely. Please. I'll probably take the head off and give that a pretty good cleaning because I haven't done that in a few brew cycles. So I want to make sure that the inside of this pump doesn't have any bits of hops left in there. So the quick clean ball off. Dip tube. These are cooling port adapters. That's just had water running through it, so I'll just leave those to dry. And the heating element. I'm going to unplug that here. And I will remove that for cleaning. I don't like to have cables attached to the kettle when I'm moving it around. Again, don't put the heating element completely underwater, please. Good. It looks inside. And you can just see in the middle here the hop cone that formed, trub cone, sorry. The spiral is going to need a good cleaning. Not a big deal. Comes off pretty easily. One of the things I do want to show is the quick clean valve. One of the nice things about those is that you get the advantages of a ball valve, being able to regulate pump flow and yet still be able to take it apart every brew session to get that cleaned out inside. And so that's just a tri-clamp, a 2-inch tri-clamp. We're going to pull this apart into 2 pieces. There's a tri-clamp gasket, there's a PTFE gasket, and there's a silicone O-ring on there. I usually leave that on and just take the PTFE gasket out. And my cleaning process consists entirely of just rinsing it out. This is not on the cold side, this is all on the hot side. So I just give everything a good rinse, and I'll let it dry before the next brew session, and it's good to go. There's one more PTFE seal on that side, that just comes right out. You can really get in there and rinse all the bits out and make sure that it's clean and dry for the next time. So I'm going to give everything just a water rinse, pretty straightforward. The one thing that I want to mention about the kettle, in terms of cleaning the kettle, I also just use water and a sponge. If you've got a pot scrubber like this, please, you're going to be tempted to do it, but don't do it. Don't use the rough side of the sponge. Don't use the scouring side. You will harm the finish of the kettle. It leaves fine scratch marks. You may not see it first, but when you look closely, they're there. And those are not easy to get out without a lot of work. Use the soft side of the sponge, and I have found that using a scrubber with just plastic bristles, here I think these are nylon, is also okay. This isn't hard enough to scratch the surface. So please, if you're going to use anything to clean it, make sure you're using the soft side of the sponge. You don't want to damage that nice mirror finish. My equipment I just store, basically I hang up all my clamps and gaskets here above the sink. I've got all my parts going into a couple drip trays here, letting those dry out, and then those go into bins that I set under the brew table. If you are coming to HomebrewCon this year, 2020, I've got a stand at the conference, and I am bringing this beer with me. That's why I brewed a bit more. So I'll be serving that at the table. Come on by and say hello and enjoy a drink, and happy to answer any questions or comments that you might have. Always good to hear feedback from the customers. So that was the HERMS Duo Brew Day. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions or comments, go ahead and leave those right on the blog page, and I'd be happy to respond. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.